number of different things related to hygiene, right? We talked about those things. So now we got to some certain things about purity. Relating to purity, we talked about the toothbrush and using toothbrushes or the siwak. We talked about that too. So now we are on page 34 in our book. What book is that? Let me show you the book so you could remember. The book is actually called this. This is the book that we are using, and right now we are on page 34. Will we be doing all of the book? It's a 2-year program, so we'll get to as much as we can. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to cover a lot. All right, and we actually left off with this part, removing or disapproval of removing gray hair. Of course, we're still in the area of beautification. We also talked about piercing. Remember that? We talked about the piercing part. So let's continue, inshallah, with the same topic. Sorry, you guys, that I'm actually sitting this way. Remember, I'm going downwards with my ability. All right, so the disapproval of removing gray hair. Is it haram to remove gray hair? Well, for the part about gray hair, it's not haram to dye the gray hair, but it's actually not the sunnah to remove, in other words, to pluck the gray hair. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the gray hairs on Judgment Day will actually be, if the person got these gray hairs because of their struggle for Allah Almighty, that it will be nur yawm al-qiyamah. It will be light on Judgment Day. It will be the light for them on Judgment Day. All right, so can I actually dye the gray hair with henna or katam? So what is henna and what is katam? So katam is an herb that was known, or that is known in Yemen and also Somalia, in where it's a red dye that they actually that particular plant produces, and they would actually cover their gray hair with. So it was their dye, call it an herbal dye. All right, very similar to henna. I don't know how different it is. I've never really tried katam. I know henna, but I'm sure you all know it. All right, but can we actually dye our hair with the actual, I guess, the French or whatever company that dyes hair and the different hair dye? You can actually dye hair on a condition that the hair dye is actually not black. So does that mean I can't use black dye? Well, that's a sunnah not to use black dye. And scholars then had differences of opinions on speaking about black dye. One, is it haram? Two, is it haram? Two, is it is black henna based on intention? So why did they even have these differences of opinions on black dye? And why black alone? So the thing is that the Prophet ﷺ clarified when he saw Abu Bakr Siddiq's dad, he basically told them to dye his hair and avoid black. And it was common culture that black dye was actually the dye that was commonly used by the Christians and the Jews to actually use black dye. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling them to avoid that in order not to, I guess, take the trend of a Christian and a Jewish trend. So scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether that was avoiding blending in with a certain cultural tradition that is common within a group of people, or is it that it wasn't going to be something that, according to the Prophet ﷺ, fitting somebody like Abu Bakr's dad, like he's a very old man, that if you were to dye it black, that it was going to be really obvious that it doesn't suit a very old man to put on black. It was going to be, like standing out differently. It wasn't going to be matching basically his, aesthetically speaking, it wasn't going to be matching his age, in where to put something that is going to really stand off for somebody that is old. And of course, white complexion, to really put black, it's like, wait a minute, this is not matching. So is it an aesthetic issue? Is it a cultural issue? Or is it because the Prophet ﷺ really said avoid black, therefore avoid black, for a reason that we don't know? Or is it that it was really, if we say that it's an aesthetic part, in other words, it's not necessarily haram, it's really your choice, but it was the situation of the context of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq being an elderly man, that the Prophet ﷺ actually considered that. For the scholars that said it wasn't necessarily an aesthetic issue, but a cultural issue, then we're going to say, yes, Islamically, you are supposed to stand out as a Muslim. So what does that mean, stand out as a Muslim? If there is a culture practiced by the Jews and the Christians, Hindus, or whatever religion group, even if that culture was a culture of deviant group of Muslims, you should not actually practice that. Why? Because by practicing that particular culture, you are losing your mold. So Islam is telling you, don't lose your mold, don't lose your boundary. And this is one reason. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ literally said, Khaliful Yahuda wa Nasara. What does that mean? He literally said, be different from the Jews and the Christians in their appearances, practices, tradition, culture, and so forth. So this is just an idea. So what can I do? What can I do? You can use dark brown to be on the safe side. Can I use black? Because, hey, my original hair is black. I'm just laying it out for you. You can actually use it. And the preponderant is that you can use black, but it's best to avoid it, just for the hadith, even though there are differences of opinions between scholars. I'm just letting you know. The etiquette of relieving oneself. So in other words, actually using the bathroom. The first thing is to say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubthi wal-khaba'ith. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from the male and the female jinn. Jinn? What does that have to do with the bathroom? I'm just going into the bathroom. Why are we talking about jinn here? Well, that's because jinn and the let's say the khaba'ith, the female jinn, and is basically most of the times using or choosing their homes to be in areas that are not clean. Okay, so some scholars actually interpreted this hadith that it's not male and female jinn, but it's actually from the impurities and the female jinn. Okay, so why are we even doing that? Now, I want you guys to remember that when we're talking about jinn, all right, jinn are a different world. Jinn, generally speaking, can harm us. How can they harm us? What do they do? Well, harming is, we could see it, like the Prophet ﷺ actually ordered us to actually seek refuge in Allah Almighty from the harm of jinn. Allah a'udhu bi kalimatillahi tammati min sharri ma khalaq. I seek refuge in Allah Almighty, in his words, in all his words, from the evils of what he had created. Min ash-shaytan, from the shaytan, from the devil. Min nafkhihi wa hamzihi wa nafthihi wa nafkhi, from his blows, from the words, the vibes that he gives people, and from whatever harm he may cause in relating to us. So what does that mean? Does that mean exorcism? That's a different story. Inshallah, we'll talk about it some other time. Some other time to actually give more explanation in that regards. But generally speaking, you're seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. So when you enter the bathroom, you enter with your left foot. When you enter with your left foot, and when you leave the bathroom, you say ghufranak. So why am I saying ghufranak, even though I just relieved myself? Well, you're saying ghufranak because during the time you are in the bathroom, even though you are actually recognizing the blessing of the Lord Almighty by having the ability to actually be healthy and relieve yourself, that you're not able to say in there Bismillah, but you just say Ghufranak, Ya Allah, I seek your forgiveness for not being able to forgive you for the ability of being able to relieve myself or even be healthy in the way that I'm using the bathroom. All right. So you would say Ghufranak. So you leave it with your right foot. It's now the other thing about using the bathroom, what can be a bathroom in open spaces. You can use the bathroom in areas, but you want to avoid open spaces. So what if it's an open space? If it's an open space, you want to avoid the areas that are, you don't want to face the Qibla, and you want to turn against the Qibla, and you also want to make sure that you are not relieving yourself under a shade or in people's pathway. Okay, so you don't want to do that. I mean, right now it's totally different because we actually have public bathrooms almost everywhere. So the other thing is that you want to just remember, like right we said right there. So the Prophet ﷺ actually said, they said, what are the acts causing cursing? The Prophet ﷺ actually replied, it is the one who relieves himself in the paths of people and in the place of shade. So why the place of shade? We're not talking about a place of shade inside the bathroom. We're talking about a place of shade where people would usually sit underneath. In other words, keep it clean for others. And that's the same thing. Islam is about cleansing, hygiene. If you want to relieve yourself in an area, keep it clean and be fair for others. So don't harm others by polluting their places of rest. Okay. The other part is, it is actually disliked that a person would relieve himself in the place of their bathing. But so in other words, while you're taking a shower, don't relieve yourself. But here's one thing. If the actual urine is going in the sewer, then it's okay to use, at least urinate, while you're bathing. So what about this hadith? How do you make up of this hadith? So this hadith is actually talking about, remember back in the days, they actually used to bathe. They would have a bucket of water, and then they would have like a tub underneath them, but they did not used to have, of course, sewer. So they would collect that water, and later they would probably wash the house with it, or even plant and water their plants with it. All right. So in that situation, that's when the Prophet ﷺ had actually forbid that you would urinate in that instance when the water is going to be collected and you're just going to be standing in your own pee. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the Muslims that, hey, don't urinate in the water that is, it's called the rakid. Rakid means where it's stagnant water. Don't do any urination where you're going to be polluting your own self. All right. So stagnant water. It is permissible to urinate while standing. By do so, sitting is preferred. So that's for boys. Urinating. Now, one thing, for boys, there are differences of opinions on the part of urinating standing. Urinating standing, is it permissible? Because of Sayyidah Aysha, there is a hadith where she actually said, whoever said that the Prophet ﷺ urinated standing had actually made a lie. The Prophet ﷺ never urinated standing. But there are Sahaba that said, well, I had actually seen him urinate standing. Yes, he wasn't urinating in front of them, but he was standing, and they knew that he was actually, they were on a journey or something, but Sayyidah Aisha wasn't necessarily with him. But the other Sahaba said, well, no, we had actually seen it. Now, one thing is that it's really important that when you urinate, do not urinate in burrows. We're in burrows because the Prophet ﷺ actually explained that the burrows are also places of jinn, not only animals, but also places of jinn. We're talking about burrows. Now, of course, it's obligatory to keep clean of the urine. So what does that mean? Keeping clean of the urine or any type of impurity. So even if it's defecation, so the person is doing a number 2, for example, that you would actually clean the area. Now, here's one thing. Is that to cleanse the area using toilet paper, using rocks, The only thing that you don't want to use are two things: animal dung, and you don't want to use bones. Why not bones? Because bones are the food for the jinn. How do we understand jinn? Why are we having jinn so many times frequent in a dars that relates to purity? Now, one thing, even when you want to do ruqya, by the way, this is on a side, you guys. Just I would say this past year or two is probably, those are the most times that I received a lot of different cases of people dealing with exorcism and magic and so forth. And I think it's becoming a lot more frequent. One main reason is, yes, people going through magic as another way to get what they want. They're away from fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the other part is really how many times people are not considerate over the rulings of tahara, the rulings of purification. So they become susceptible to a lot of the different impurities that jinn themselves actually love to connect to. So the first thing, for example, if I were to do ruqya, the first thing that I'm going to be asking the person to do is actually wudu and to be pure. Now, the other thing is that you just want to keep that in mind, because to stay pure and clean is extremely important. The different levels of being pure and clean. The first level is to actually keep the area clean using toilet paper, rocks. At the end of the day, removing the actual impurity. The second level is to actually use water. If you're able to use water, then use water. That's a farther level. All right. So to use water. Using water is sunnah. So what does the word sunnah actually mean? You will be rewarded for doing it and not sinned for not doing it, but you will be rewarded for using water. You are obligated to use water in purifying yourself in situations where the contamination has gone beyond the area of discreet. Okay. When it has gone beyond the area of discreet. And of course, in that situation, many times toilet paper will not suffice to cleanse the area. And you would know it by smell. You would know it by the different effect to it. In that situation, you would want to use water to make sure that you're cleaning the area. Is it obligatory to use water? It is not always obligatory to use water. I remember having a phone call from an inmate, and he wasn't, I think I mentioned that before, he wasn't able to do the washing because in prison, if you were to wash yourself, you're going to have to, there aren't any doors. So they're all exposed. So if they were to wash themselves, they're going to be exposed even more. So what they were wondering is like, do I really have to wash myself? If I wash myself, my aura is going to be open and exposed to the rest of the 10 inmates that are with me. So what should I do in that situation? They can use toilet paper, and using water is sunnah. The person should not hold their private part with their right hand while urinating. And of course, this is irrelevant for girls, but in general, is that you want to avoid touching your private part after wudu. Now, the scholars actually had differences of opinions, all right? Differences of opinions on whether, if, for example, they were to touch their private part, and we're talking about innocent touch. We're not talking about, any touch that is not appropriate, okay? We're talking about an innocent touch. So in that situation, does it actually invalidate your wudu? Differences of opinions between scholars, because the Prophet ﷺ, in one hadith, he said that it was bud'atun mink, that it's just part of your body. So why is that any different? In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ actually ordered that the Sahabi would actually redo his wudu for touching the private part. For the part about touching the private part, there's a difference between touching the private part, let me call it an innocent touch, and of course between any form of of, let me call it a non-innocent touch. For the non-innocent touch, what I mean by that is any type of stimulating the area. That would be haram to stimulate the area. Of course, we're not talking about marriage here, but we're talking about a person stimulating themselves. And if the person were to stimulate themselves, and of course, if they were to reach the climax and where it's making something like a pulse, or even for men ejaculation, that would actually require complete shower, because that would be a major impurity. Okay, even if it's haram according to majority of the scholars, not all, but just to let you know. So the touching itself is we're talking about just a simple touch. Okay, that the preponderant is that you do not have to redo your wudu, but if there was an exaggeration in the touch that basically stimulated the organ, all right, and led to the climax of sexual desire, then in that situation it requires a complete shower. All right. It is permissible to clean, of course, with water, stone, but of course, why dung? We mentioned that one. Why? Well, dung, the animal dung, basically the animal droppings, you can't use it because it's impurity itself, and the Prophet ﷺ actually made that very clear. All right. The other thing is that here it says it's impermissible to use less than 3 stones. Well, it's all about making sure that the area is clean, making sure that the area is clean. So do you necessarily have to use stones? No. If you're using toilet paper, that's okay. Container, it's not allowed to, we mentioned that one. Containers and utensils. For the containers and utensils, generally the containers and utensils, you've got 3 different things. Number one is that the Prophet ﷺ actually said, do not, look at this hadith right there, do not drink from gold or silver containers, and do not wear silk, all right, as they are for them in this world and you for the hereafter. Now, one thing, we mentioned that one before, all right, so for silver and for gold, we mentioned that one earlier, all right, so we're talking about real silver and real gold. We're not talking about, plastic silver look utensils, okay, or something, like what you have at home is actually not silver. Yes, it looks silver, but it's actually from a different chemical. All right. Now looking at that, all right, just to keep that in mind. Now, the other part about wearing silk, it's only impermissible for men, but for women, it is permissible for them to wear silk. Jennifer, I guess you can wear all the silk that you have. You don't own silk? You guys, silk is extremely expensive. We're not talking about, I'm not talking about this being silk, this real silk. We're talking, what is the worm that does silk? There's silkworm? Is it silkworm? Okay, it's called silkworm, I guess. Harir, I know, but we call it dut al-qaz, Allah yahdiki. Dut al-qaz. Well, now the Tunisians got to unlearn something. Silkworm, okay. Dut al-qaz. Yeah, I just have to pick on Tunisians. Yeah, dut al-qaz. شجاب القز للحرير. They just want to be more eloquent. All right. The other thing is that when we're speaking about different utensils, it's really important to just remember the utensils that you use. All right. What about utensils that you might buy a garage sale, or utensils that you might buy at Goodwill or thrift store or whatever? It is permissible to buy those utensils, even if non-Muslims were using it. What about that there might be a dog? Everything is supposed to be pure unless proven otherwise. Everything is supposed to be pure unless proven otherwise. In other words, you don't have to, get paranoid. What did these people have at home? Right? But if you actually see that there was, a dog, for example, or that these people, you saw a dog right there using and licking a certain utensil or eating from a utensil. In that situation, you don't want to suffice by putting it in the dishwasher. You want to make sure that you actually wash that 7 times, and one of them with soil. So you're going to wash it one of those times with soil, and then wash it 6 times with that. Now, for the purification for the salah, just want you guys to remember that we've got 2 things about impurity. There's the major impurity and there is the minor impurity. And we said that the major impurity would mean that you have to take a shower to remove it. And we said that the major impurities are 1, sexual relations, or any type of an actual climax that the person had actually reached. If it's basically a girl reaching the orgasm, if it's a boy, basically ejaculation in that situation, whether that was during sleep or during being awake, that's a major impurity, and therefore requires that the person would actually make a complete shower. That's one side. The other side is basically after a cycle or after postpartum. A cycle would mean that after she finishes her period. After postpartum is basically, just to review, if the pregnancy is 9 weeks and above, that would actually mean the bleeding that comes after a 9-week pregnancy, whether that was an abortion, miscarriage, regardless of what the reason was, or a normal delivery. All right, the bleeding that comes afterwards is called postpartum, in where as long as the bleeding is there for up to 40 days, she is not permitted to pray or fast. All right, but if the bleeding stops at any time, even if it is before the 40 days, she would basically make the first shower, and then she would basically make her salah. Not every single vaginal bleeding is necessarily postpartum or period, because the other type of vaginal bleeding that is not postpartum and not a period is basically called istihada, and it does not actually fall under the major impurity. It falls under the minor impurity. Not all minor impurities are the same. For minor impurities, the minor impurity just means you gotta do wudu. Wudu is at different levels. There is the simplest form of wudu, which is يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. The simplest form of wudu is that you are face. The borders of the face is basically from the hairlines to the earlobes to the lower chin. So this is the face. Washing it 3 times is a sunnah. Doing it once is obligatory. Washing face, hands up to the elbow, right and then left. If you are to do left then right, the sunnah is to do it right then left, but the sunnah means it's an extra deed, okay? Extra deed, and that's how the Prophet ﷺ did it. To do left and right, your wudu is still counted. So face, hands, head. For the head, is it 1/4? Is it all of the head? Can I just do 3 hairs? Do I need to do more? Do I need to do the whole? Differences of opinions between scholars to make the story short. If you are just to do this much, that's okay. All right. For the minor impurity, things like passing gas, number 1, number 2, going to the bathroom for number 1, number 2. And then of course we said vomiting, differences of opinions between scholars, sleeping, passing gas, all that basically requires that you would make wudu because you are in a state of a minor impurity. Any type of a discharge from the body, actually makes the person go into a minor impurity, and therefore they just need to do wudu. So even if we're talking about the discharges, we talked about the cervical mucus discharge last time, so we don't need to go in detail. If we're looking at situations where the person is discreting and discharging constant discharge of any of that, constantly passing gas, constantly bleeding, constantly having vaginal bleeding, then they would just make wudu for every salah. So now that we got to the wudu part, then that actually takes us into ablution or wudu. Now, wudu, the Prophet ﷺ actually made wudu, and the Sahaba explained how the Prophet ﷺ actually did his wudu. Let's read this hadith. All right. Humran, the ex-slave of Uthman bin Affan, he stated that Uthman bin Affan, Uthman bin Affan is the daughter, the husband of two of the Prophet's daughters. Two of the Prophet's daughters. Two. One of them died, and then the Prophet gets him married to another one. All right? One of them dies. Ruqayya and Kulthum. Because Zainab was married to someone else. Who was Zainab married to? Who was it? Come on. I said it before. Who was Zainab married to? But who's Fatima married to? Ali ibn Abi Talib. Who's Zainab married to? The relative of Khadija, Abu al-As. مش لا عمرو بن العاص, Abu al-As ibn al-Rabi'. Right? He's basically Sayyidah Khadija's sister's nephew, basically. Let's do it. Hold on. Ready? Okay, let's do it. So we've got right there. Okay, ready? So here we go. We're just drawing the different drawings, okay? Or maybe, you know what? So that we won't be. Okay, here's Abu al-As ibn al-Rabi'. All right, and here's the Sayyidah Khadija. All right, Sayyidah Khadija had her sister Hala. All right, Abu al-As ibn al-Rabi' is Hala's son. Okay, Khadija, who's Khadija? The Prophet ﷺ's most beloved wife. Okay, so that's that he was married. He was fighting the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning. You guys know the story? Abu al-As ibn al-Rabi', you guys know his story? Okay, go ahead. What? Yep, there you go. So he washed his, so what happened? Uthman, he called for a pitcher of water and he made his wudu. He washed his hands 3 times. Then he rinsed his mouth 3 times, inserted water in his nose to make the istinshaq. Then he washed his face 3 times. Then he washed his right arm until the elbow 3 times. Then he washed his left arm until the elbow 3 times. Then he wiped his head. Then he washed his right foot until the ankles 3 times. Then he did similarly with the left foot. He then said, I saw the Messenger of Allah make ablution like this ablution of mine. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever makes ablution like this ablution of mine and then stands to and prays 2 rak'ahs with no other thoughts coming to his mind, then his previous sins will be forgiven. All right. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at that the Sahaba themselves are actually describing what it does. For somebody that is a new Muslim, I would say simple. Even if you don't wash your nose, etc., if you memorize the basics. So if I were to have somebody that is a new Muslim, I will just say face, hands, head, feet. Face, hands, head, feet. If you were to wash those, that's actually completing it. If you want to add to the face, nose, and mouth, great, good job. You've done a sunnah. All right, continue. Face, hands, head, feet. With the feet up to the sticking out bones right there. Sorry to get it out. Up to the sticking out up bones right there to actually complete it. To not leave not even a small area in those areas required washing. So the conditions for making a complete wash, what are the conditions? Number 1, the intention. You're not just jumping in a pool with no intention, but you actually have the intention that you are actually doing wudu. Number 2, mentioning the name of Allah Almighty. Wow, it's almost 2:30. I'm going to just say this, my clock is wrong. Okay, let's move on. It looks like they didn't even get us the pizza, you guys. They didn't even get us the pizza and didn't even see it. Okay. All right. The second one is mentioning the name of Allah Almighty, mentioning the name of Allah Almighty, saying Bismillah. So do I say Bismillah while I'm actually doing the wudu? Is that obligatory? What if I didn't say Bismillah while I'm doing wudu? Differences of opinions between scholars on whether it is obligatory to say Bismillah or not. To perform the act without lengthy breaks. So what do we mean by that? It's called al-muwala. So when you're doing wudu, don't get yourself busy with other things. Just do the wudu and do it in order. Doing it in order is best. If you don't do it in order, what if you wanted to take your shoes off first, do your feet first, and then you wanted to do wash the face, hands, etc.? That's a differences of opinions between scholars. Some scholars regarded that you have to do it in order. And other scholars considered that it is mentioned in order in the ayah. So therefore, you got to do it face, hands, head, feet. You got to do it in that order. Other scholars, they regarded that the order that is face, hands, head, feet is not necessarily the order in chronology, but is the order and in addition. So add to this, just when I say apples, oranges, fruit, and whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily mean a certain order, but it's just putting them all together. So obligatory components of the ablution: washing the face, which includes rinsing the mouth and nose, washing the arms until the elbows. All right, wiping the head. So here he said all of the head. That's actually different opinions. Washing the feet until the ankles. And you could see this is actually the ayah that right there, it's in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which actually tells us all the different details of what it is to do wudu, what wudu is all about. So, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ. Wash your face and your hands up to the elbows, and then wipe on your heads, and then your feet wash them until the ankle. All right. What about the ears? Why didn't we say the ears? Majority of the scholars did actually consider that the ears are part of the head. So just think of that. And should I use different water? That is actually the sunnah, to use water for the, after doing your head, to actually do your ears with separate water is also the sunnah. Let's go beyond this one. Running the fingers through the beard, ladies, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, but it is the sunnah, if you have a beard, to actually let your hands go through the beard to make sure that the water is penetrating the hair, that is the facial hair. Washing between the fingers and the toes. So when you actually wash, make sure that the water runs between your fingers and the toes, because that, or even running up your nose, unless you are fasting. So we'll end right here, inshallah. Well, we are on page, what is that, 46, I guess? I'm assuming it's 46. So we will continue some other time. I'll leave it, you guys, for questions and answers. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I think everybody's ready to leave. Sorry, you guys. I think there's a confusion and we didn't get the pizza, unfortunately. Next time, inshallah, we will be getting the pizza. Go ahead, my dear. I can barely hear you, my dear. The tayammum. So for tayammum, it is it now or later? So for tayammum, it's pretty easy. You can use, for tayammum, you can use rock, soil, or sand, and you would just beat on it, or you can get a rock and wipe with it, and then wipe your face once and wipe your hands. So your palms, basically. And therefore, you are ready for salah. When do we actually use this method? When water is not available, literally, or when water is available, but you have a medical reason, or let me call it a logistic reason why you cannot use water, probably because you don't have enough for survival, or probably because you are not able to use it. Maybe you have an enemy that's there, or some dangerous blockage blocking you from using that water. Allah يسلمك يا حاجة. Allah يسلمك. So that's the part about dry one. All right. So the people online as well, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Oh, Habibti, we'll see. I'm so happy to see you. Inshallah. Inshallah. Maryam, go ahead, my dear.
So does ghusl have a certain order that you have to follow it, or no?
So for ghusl, it is the sunnah to actually do wudu first, in where you would be washing your private part in istinja, and then washing the rest of your body, rubbing the right side first. But if you were just to stand under the shower and basically cleanse yourself, that should suffice. So if we're looking at sunnah, you know, an extra thing you would want to do, wash your private part first, then wash the rest of your body by making wudu as your beginning, and then washing the rest of your body, starting the right side, rubbing on the right side first. That is the sunnah. But if you were, like I said, just stand under the shower and wash yourself, that should suffice.
Okay, thanks. Jazakallah khair.
All right, any other questions? I think they're all ready to leave.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Asma.
Are you okay to like stop recording? Okay. Oh.
Am I okay to stop the garden? What?
Stop recording.
Oh yeah, stop the recording. You know what? Anybody else has any questions before we stop the recording, and they don't mind being in the recording?
Actually, I'll ask with the recording on.
Right. So let's see. We're gonna stop the recording.